And we're back. I'm your host, BKP. Good morning from the office. We're North Georgia's only live online morning show, and it's election time, folks. And what does that mean? We're going to be talking to candidates here almost every day. We'll have a different candidate on the show with us. And our guest today is State Senator Josh McKoon. State Senator McKoon is a candidate for Georgia Secretary of State. Senator McKoon, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me this morning.
Let's get right into it. You've been on the show several times, and most of our viewers know you, and you've usually talking about different legislation through the session. But now we're talking about Secretary of State. Tell us a little bit about your decision to seek this office.
Well, I've always been interested in specifically the administration of elections and election law. It's been a part of my private law practice. 8 years ago, before the state Senate seat opened up in my area, I actually looked at running to succeed Karen Handel. So it's something that's been on my mind for a long time. And obviously with Secretary Kemp running for governor, it's an open seat. And so I just decided it was a good time to jump in the race and talk about the issues that are important to me, like election integrity, licensing reform, and improving the operation of the corporations division.
Let's start right in with Russia. Let's start with that. And the reason I want to bring that up is if Secretary of State, as far as safeguarding the state's elections, and sometimes some people out there misunderstand what the Secretary of State does or what the position calls for, but safeguarding the state's election. And right now, it's almost every single day we're hearing about Russia attacking our elections. Especially, I heard something that was interesting to me, that Russia is mapping our Georgia, not Georgia, but there's so many states that they're mapping their election systems. What does stuff like that mean, and how concerned are you about that in the future of our elections?
Well, I think that obviously you have some Democrat claims being made about the elections and about Russian interference or Russian meddling. That to me is not, at least it hasn't been shown so far, to be actual tampering with the electoral process. It's more about who got a hold of these DNC emails and some other things that happened during the campaign. But when we talk about the security and integrity of our elections, I think there is a lot of concern around the machines that were purchased back in 2002, these electronic voting machines that everyone's familiar with now, the touchscreen voting machines. And the next Secretary of State is going to be very involved in what we do to replace those machines, because they're at the end of their life cycle, and we're going to have to make a decision about what voting method we want to use going forward. And so I think with these accidental data breaches that have occurred and other issues that have come about, most of those have come about because there are so many different points at which data is transferred with these electronic voting machines. And I definitely think that we need to take a very hard look at going back to the old optical scan balloting. Over half of the jurisdictions in the country use those. Those are the old bubble-in paper ballots that you use a machine to just scan. And you don't have all the connectivity issues and the data issues that I think do come with the electronic voting. So that's something that I would want to look at, that I think would resolve a lot of concerns about the security of voter data.
Well, let me clear this up so I'm on the same page. We used to have the paper ballot, and it would have it written out, Republican, Democrat, whatever, and it would have the name and the little bubble under there, and you took the pencil and shaded in the one you wanted. When you were totally done with your ballot, they ran it through the scanner, right?
That's right.
And the scanner picked up the results, but then you would have a backup paper ballot, so if there was a recount from the scanner or a concern that the scanner missed it, you would have backup paper. So you're calling for backup paper system again?
That's what I'm talking about. Yes, sir. Going back to the optical scan balloting, those machines would act, because we're going to have to buy new machines regardless of what we do. And the optical scan machines, I think, actually are better on the security side while being lower cost for taxpayers. So I think it's a good deal for taxpayers. I think it gets rid of some of these concerns about data breaches, and just all around, I think that is a better option.
Well, there is a lot of criticism on the touch screen. In fact, I'm going to call it a frivolous lawsuit now, wanting to disqualify the results in the 6th district, saying there was touchscreen malfunctions. But is it that serious with those machines? It's something that has to be addressed immediately?
Well, I think it's something that the next Secretary of State, I mean, I don't think we're going to see it change in the 2018 elections, but I do think that, 2019, 2020, we're going to have a serious discussion about replacing the machines, because when they were purchased in 2002, I think the promised life cycle was 12 years. So in a lot of jurisdictions, local governments have had to go ahead and replace machines or buy new machines. And so we're going to have to do something new, whether that's buying a new generation of electronic voting machines or doing something else to replace them. So it's not really a question of doing this because of any litigation. It's the fact that we're at the point where these machines have to be replaced, and if we're going to do that anyway, why don't we pick an option that's the least costly for the taxpayer while eliminating some of these security concerns?
Voter registration seems to have a complete list of advocate groups, Washington-based advocate groups, that continue to file lawsuit after lawsuit. The complaint that was filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia was filed concerning voter registration in the last election in the 6th District. And let me just say this for the folks at home. That was not a primary between Karen Handel and everybody. That was actually how we handle a special election in Georgia. But talk a little bit about the lawsuits the Secretary of State faces and how this judge, Timothy Batten, reopened registration and what you would have done in that situation.
Well, I appreciate that question. Obviously, we are in a Republican state. Our legislature is controlled by the Republican Party. So Democrats can't change Georgia election law in the General Assembly. So their strategy over the last few years has been to shift and file lawsuits in the middle of elections and try to get federal judges to rewrite Georgia election law. That really has to come to an end. And part of my candidacy is putting the left on notice that once I'm Secretary of State, the days of settling these kind of frivolous lawsuits are going to be over. And they can go find and try and forum shop and get an Obama-appointed district court judge to give them an initial ruling. That's why we have appellate courts. That's why we have the U.S. Supreme Court. And the decision that was made to reopen voter registration and allow Democrats to add 10,000 voters to the rolls before the July 20th election in Georgia's 6th congressional district was wrongly decided. And, I think that we've got to fight those decisions and make it clear to the left that if they're going to push those things, it's not going to simply be get in front of that judge, get a hearing, get a decision, and then we're going to settle and roll over. We're going to fight those decisions, and they're ultimately going to have to be decided at the appellate level or at the United States Supreme Court. Because, again, we're going to protect and enforce the law that the legislature has passed. And having a 30-day break, that 30-day blackout period for registration is vitally important to election integrity, because it takes time when somebody registers to vote to verify that they are who they say they are, that they live where they say they live. and when you move that date up, you create a nightmare for the people that are trying to administer these elections and make sure they're being conducted fairly.
On election night, you have to, as the Secretary of State, certify elections. Not on election night, but you actually, the Secretary of State, certifies the elections. There are concerns with, sometimes when people think, well, it's only every 20 years that the Secretary of State really steps up, like the Secretary of State in Florida that had to certify the election between George Bush and Al Gore. I forget, I think his name was Ken Blackwell up in Ohio that had to verify their election. How serious is verifying elections and your concern with the next Secretary of State in some of the things that we have going on with hacking, possible hacking, and things that are going on?
Well, I think, the next Secretary of State has to be concerned about making sure that voters have confidence in our electoral process. And, that involves, I think, a forensic audit of our current system, the data center at Kennesaw, the whole process from A to Z. And then, a very thoughtful recommendation and implementation when we refresh these voting machines and put a new system in place to make sure that system has been tested, that system is ready to go, that we're not using voters to beta test the system on election day. So those are things that are going to be very important that need to start right on day one. And again, I think Secretary Kemp, I want to be clear about this, I think Secretary Kemp has done a great job of working hard with election administrators to make sure that we have a voting process that is honest and fair. But I think that's going to have to continue, and the next secretary is going to have to build on what he's done, and that certainly would be my intention if I'm elected.
You have no, how concerned are you, you have no legislative bearing as Secretary of State. I mean, really, you don't vote on anything, you don't submit legislation for consideration, I guess, but you really don't have any bearing on legislation. How concerned are you that your past as a senator is going to be highlighted during this election that actually has no bearing on the job you're seeking? And I will say it like this, because I'm going to just be candid with you, Senator. I've known you for quite some time, but I've already read a couple articles where the senator, the religious liberty senator, okay, and I think you've read some of those also.
Sure.
Religious, and actually a Secretary of State, that you have no bearing on that kind of legislation. What's your concern on some of the media and the things that they're going to bring up during this campaign?
Well, the press is going to be the press, and obviously I will not be I'm not going to be the choice of the mainstream media in this campaign. What I will say is that anybody that looks at my legislative record on the issues that are involved in the Secretary of State's office will see I have been laser focused on fairness to everyone involved in the process, to keeping our elections process honest, and making sure that every person who wants to vote and who is legally entitled to vote may cast a vote. Now, my legislative record, I'm proud of it. If people want to talk about it, I'll be happy to defend it. I think the one thing you can take from my legislative record is that I'm not going to back away from a difficult decision or a fight when it comes to principle. And I think that's exactly the kind of qualities you want in somebody that you're charging with being the guardian of the integrity of our electoral process. You and I both know that the far left, which is very well funded, they've targeted these Secretary of State's races, and they've gone after Secretaries of State because they know that's how they can win, is by corrupting the electoral process. So I think it's going to take somebody like me who's not going to back away from a fight, who's willing to stand up for these principles. And so I think if somebody takes a hard look at my legislative record, what they're going to see is somebody who's willing to take that fight to the far left.
Senator, let me be, what time we have left here. What are some of the issues with Secretary of State? And I know Brian Kemp, the current Secretary of State, is opened the position up. He's seeking the office of governor. So what things would you change in there that, not saying anything derogatory about Secretary Kemp, but what things in the Secretary of State's office are you a laser beam on that you want to go in and you want to work this way or change in a different way for the citizens of Georgia?
Well, I'll just mention two things. One of the things the Secretary of State is responsible for is licensing. And Americans for Prosperity recently conducted a national study that 5.4 million new jobs would be created if we reformed the process of being licensed for various professions. And so I think we've got to take a hard look at a number of our licensed professions and see, is there a way for us to create a pathway for people that want to do good, hard, honest work, but the barriers that have been erected by government to them being able to do that work have proven too cumbersome for them to navigate. So I think that's something that we really need to work on. I think the Secretary of State needs to continue to be an advocate for small businesses. I certainly would like to see a program out of our office who would travel around the state and provide workshops for people that are interested in transitioning to become small business owners. I was at a Waffle House a couple of months ago talking to a gentleman that was working there, and he desperately wants to get into the real estate business, but he just can't figure out how to transition. He's got to provide for his family. He's working 60, 70 hours a week, but he'd like to take control of his destiny and own his own business. And I think that's something the Secretary of State's office ought to partner with local chambers of commerce and other stakeholders to try to give people the tools they need to navigate that sort of thing. And the last thing I would mention is I think Georgia needs a chief transparency officer, someone who is advocating for open government. And what I'm going to do, and I've offered this legislation the last couple of years I've been in the Senate, is to push a program that I call the Georgia Checkbook. It's modeled on a program in Ohio that my friend, the state treasurer there, Josh McKoon, moved forward. But this would be an open online database where any Georgia citizen could go and see down to the expenditure level how state agencies are spending the money the legislature appropriates to them. So you would be able to see down to, just like your own check register at home in your household, you'd be able to see how the state is spending your money. And I'd like to see us do that. I think it would improve state operations. I think it would reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. So those are the kinds of things I'm excited about doing as Georgia's next Secretary of State.
You filed your paperwork last week to start being able to raise money. How is that going?
So far, so good. And I'm letting people know, we're happy with, small or large contributions. We're just, getting out there and getting the money we need to run this operation. But I'm very excited to have Sue Everhart, former chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, as my campaign chairman, and my good friend Robert Hennessy helping out as our campaign treasurer. Having folks from Cobb County and Fulton County willing to lend their name and reputation, I think speaks to the kind of reputation I've built over my 7 years of service in the state Senate. We're getting support from all over the state, and I'm just really excited to get to work, both on not just on the fundraising, but on building our grassroots team and carrying this message around the state of safeguarding our elections and being a partner with small business and looking for ways to break down barriers for people that want to be able to pursue just the dignity of good, honest, hard work.
Well, Senator, I would ask you about running a statewide campaign, but and I would ask you if you felt you were ready to run a statewide campaign other than your district there. Is it Muskogee County down there in Columbus? Did I get that correct?
That's right. So I represent 4 districts, or 4 counties: Muskogee, Harris, Meriwether, and Troup.
But I would ask you if you were prepared to run a statewide campaign, coming from being a state senator. But you've been running a statewide campaign for your legislation and the things that you've tried to get done for years now. So, I mean, you already have friends all across the state. Is that correct?
Well, I do feel like the way I've tried to engage the legislative process is to, yes, go around and educate people, not just in my area, but around the state. And so I've, not just from my Senate service, but from my activism with the Republican Party prior to that, I've made a lot of good friends all over the state. And, have received a lot of encouragement as I was going through the decision-making process, and to get in the race, and just getting a whole lot of support and offers for help and invitations to come and visit with people. So I feel like we're not starting from scratch. That's for sure. We've got a lot of good people who are willing to lend their name and their reputation to what we're trying to do.
Let me finish up by obviously I don't know what this has any bearing really on running for the office, but everybody's going to ask this, and no matter what office you're running for, maybe even if you're running for county commissioner, you're going to be asked, do you support the president, Donald Trump, or are you going to distance your campaign away from? I don't know, Senator. I mean, it doesn't matter what you run for. It's like with it doesn't matter what you run for. People are going to ask you if you support the president, or are you going to distance yourself from the president. How do you feel? How do you feel concerning our president right now and how things are going? You like to make a comment on that?
Well, obviously, I support President Trump and the administration, the work they're doing. I feel like this president has been honoring the commitments he made during the campaign. I tell people all the time, if you want to know about this president and whether or not he keeps his word, I just have 3 words for you: Justice Neil Gorsuch. And he's going to have the opportunity, I think, to do a lot more over the next 3.5 years. But the last 6 months, I've seen a president who, time after time, has been redeeming the promises he made to the American people, and I think that's really all you can ask.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. Anything else from you before you want to make any other comments before we go today?
Well, I just hope that as we travel around, you've been so gracious to have me on your show by phone many times. I would love to be able to visit you in person in your new studio the next time we talk. I would really enjoy that.
You're welcome. There's a standing invite for you to stop by, and when you're visiting North Georgia next time in your campaign schedule, we want to have you in. We tell all candidates this: thank you for your willingness to serve, and we wish you well, and we'll be back in touch with you soon, Senator.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
That is State Senator Josh McKoon, running for Secretary of State of Georgia. State Senator Josh McKoon, Secretary of State of Georgia. We do not, Democrats, Republicans, Independent, any candidate that qualifies, that fills out the qualifying paper to run for office, and in your state races, the first level of that is to fill out the paperwork intending to raise money that says you're serious about the office. So we invite all those candidates here for an interview. I'm your host, BKP. When we get back, see, what could we talk about? We could talk about, let's see, Putin, Russia. We could talk about foreign steel dumping. We could talk about the trade crisis that we have. We could talk about the ceasefire in Syria. The list goes on. But we'll probably have to talk about Russian hacking. We'll probably have to talk about Don Jr., the bombshell. Every time you hear a bombshell report from the New York Times. I'm your host, BKP. We'll be right back after these messages. Sam, take us a break.
Ace is your helpful place for paint and home goods, tools, outdoor living, and lawn equipment. But did you know Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge is a little bit more? We have hunting rifles and accessories for your next hunting trip. We have Amish furniture imported directly from Ohio. And we have Ace Custom Woodworks for all your custom wood project needs, from cabinets to artwork. Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge, we have your new house in stock.